Hello, Jets fans, and welcome to another episode of Rich Sports Talk. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Make sure to give us a like and a subscribe button down below so you don't miss any of our latest content. We're going to have a lot on the New York Jets offseason, this entire offseason, and what will be a transformative offseason for this franchise. And another key domino that we've talked about for weeks is likely falling into place. But before we get into all that, once again, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, I need your interaction on this channel. If you're joining us after the live stream, make sure to check our community page where I've given you 3 ideas for new videos. And again, this is as much about me as it is about you. I want you to let me know what videos you would like to see on the channel. I've given you 3 options, so go check that on the community page. But also, I want to hear what you think about our topic. We have a poll in the comments right now. And if you want to guarantee that your comment is read and your question is read, make sure to use that super chat feature to not only cut the line and get immediately to the front of the line, but to guarantee that your question and your comment is read live on the air. And again, guys, check us out on social media using the hashtag, using the handle @RichSportsTalk. So the big news today coming out with the Jets is it originally started that Aaron Rodgers, the decision was likely coming this week. However, as it has come out in the last couple of hours, multiple reports saying it is likely that the New York Jets are going to move on. Now, look, I'm not completely shocked by this. I've been of the camp that Aaron Rodgers was likely not going to be a member of the New York Jets in 2025 for a myriad of reasons. Number one, the coaching staff that recruited him, that brought him in, that he was comfortable with, is all gone. They've got a whole new coaching staff. They have a rookie play caller and an offensive coordinator, and it just never seemed like he was going to really mesh with this new staff. And plus, it felt like this franchise really needed a reboot after the last 2 years and really needed a change in the culture. And look, they're going to be led by an Aaron. They're going to have a face of a franchise named Aaron. It's just not going to be Aaron Rodgers. It is going to be Aaron Glenn. Because Aaron Glenn, it is clear, wants to establish a certain culture here. He wants this full franchise to follow him. And look, they are gutting this franchise, not just on the surface, but I mean, they have made the effort to get rid of key members of this organization that have been here for a long time and getting them out of here to completely reboot the culture. Now, again, you look at this situation. Are the Jets a better team with Aaron Rodgers in 2025? Yes, they are a better football team. Is he the best quarterback option that the Jets would have had in 2025? Yes. Does the financials make a lot of sense for the Jets to keep Rodgers? Yes. And I will break down all the different financial situations. If you had to ask me right now, I think that my money is on Aaron Rodgers and the Jets mutually agreeing to part ways, that Aaron Rodgers will play next year with a different team, and that Davante Adams will likely not be on the Jets next year and will likely be moved. And we'll talk about that. And that's one of the options. Again, check it out on the community page. I have given you 3 options right now of different videos I want you to look at. I want you to look at and let me know which one of those videos would you like to see come to the channel this week. And look, I have some pretty good options, I think. I'll get back to the Aaron Rodgers one. But again, check out the community page right now. You have 3 options. Option number 1, who's a dark horse quarterback target for the New York Jets? Option number 2, the trade possibilities for potentially Davante Adams. And number 3, keep or release, which is basically we look at the Jets' top 10 free agents, and I give you my opinions of which ones should be kept and which ones will likely be moved off of. And again, check out that poll in the comment section right now on YouTube to make sure to give me your thoughts on whether you want Aaron Rodgers back or not, even though it seems likely that Rodgers is going to be gone next season. And look, I give the front office a lot of credit because this is a difficult situation, but if you read the tea leaves that have kind of come out the last couple of days and weeks, it seems like this was coming. Because think about all the things that have happened. They hire Aaron Glenn. No really connection to Rodgers. Defensive guy, but someone that has played with the Jets and understands the Jets culture. They hire a first-time offensive coordinator. someone that has no rapport and would have to butt heads with Aaron Rodgers potentially. And Aaron was pushing back against guys who have done this in this league and have had success in this league. Then you hear the other little things. They haven't talked to Devontae Adams this offseason. Not a shocker. I think that they want to figure out the Rodgers situation first, but it's just another little trickle effect that you look at and you go, okay, this makes more sense why they're moving on from Rodgers. And look, the financial thing is also very important because one of the key things about this offseason is who have they hired? They've hired Muji as the GM. Why would they maybe do that? Well, what did the Broncos just go through? The Broncos went through an even worse cap situation with the quarterback than the Jets did. And that was building a roster through trades, through shrewd moves, through shrewd drafting in order to put that franchise in a position to compete with a major liability with the financials. And when you look at the financials right now for Aaron Rodgers, like here's how it would play on out. If Rodgers doesn't play for the Jets in 2025, if he's cut or retired, it will be a $49 million dead charge, which is an accumulation of his prorated bonuses from the past years. Look, it is a substantial cap hit, and it's more than the cap charge if he would be on the roster. If Rodgers was on the roster, it would be $23.5 million. Now, your first thought is, well, it makes more sense to keep him on the roster because it's $23.5 million. However, the $49 million could be interesting. Now, the Jets, if they make it a post-June 1st cut, it would be $14 million in 2025 and $35 million in 2026. However, I think that the best scenario is you absorb the $49 million dead charge this offseason, make it a difficult year this year in terms of getting pieces, but you leave yourself with more cap space in 2026 for a couple of major reasons, one of which is you have multiple extensions coming up. You have Jermaine, you have Sauce, you have Garrett. You'll have more money in the pot when you are looking to renegotiate and give them long-term contracts potentially. So I know a lot of people are saying, well, wait a minute. It still makes sense to keep them on for the $23.5 million. But here's the major downside and why I also think the Jets are likely moving on. If Rodgers played next year for the Jets, if he came back for one season, now again, he could technically renegotiate the contract, but I'm not sure how much he'd be willing to do that again. And it also hurts the Jets because you're just kicking more money down the road. But if he came back for 2025, the dead charge would balloon to $63 million for 2026. The reason was because of the option bonus. It's prorated for cap purposes over the length of the contract. So you look at it right now. Yes, it would be brutal, but then you look at how that would be. That would be an even bigger charge. So instead, if they release him after the contract next year, after the 2025 season, it would be $63 million against the cap in 2026. And then they could also split that up with a June 1st designation, but then that money balloons to $21 million and $42 million in 2027. And let's be honest, did we really want to be paying Rodgers $42 million in 2027? I don't think so. It would be one thing if Aaron Rodgers was coming off a year where he was a clear top 10 quarterback, where it looked like he could still lead this team to the Super Bowl. But for all intents and purposes, that is done. And I think that this is the right decision for the Jets. It's a painful decision, and it's going to be a difficult one in terms of the quarterbacks. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, guys. It is not going to be an easy season. I think this is going to be a year where you have to grit your teeth and move forward. Now, if you look at the options before the draft, Justin Fields was someone I was banging the table for, but with the news that they are likely moving on from Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh, and again, I wouldn't touch Russell Wilson, I don't think Justin Fields is going to hit the market. If he somehow does, he would be my number one priority. There are some intriguing options. I can get into that in the Dark Horse video in terms of quarterbacks, but realistically, I don't think Sam Darnold would ever come back here. I know a lot of people have put that out there. I just don't think he wants to go through that experience again. And look, he's going to make a lot of money. And the Jets are going to have to pay Aaron Rodgers a ton of money. Like, let's put it this way. I think the Jets, if they were smart and made the logical decision, would absorb the major cap hit this offseason. But again, that's $49 million against the cap. So you're paying Aaron Rodgers $49 million. How are you going to pay Sam Darnold 30-something million a year? I don't see that happening. Now, could the Jets maybe trade for a veteran? Could they go in the draft? The draft is tricky for me because I've talked to Dom C. I've talked to a lot of guys. I've done my own scouting. I don't really think this is a good quarterback chat. And I've already seen it on Twitter. Oh, Jackson Dart at 7. That would be a stretch. If you had to ask me today what my perfect draft scenario for the New York Jets this year would be, it'd be an interesting one. My perfect draft scenario for the Jets would be this. I would, if I'm the Jets, do everything in my power to try to trade number 7 and try to get a future first-round pick in next year's draft. I think it's a lot deeper quarterback class. I think there's a lot better talent at the quarterback position. In this draft, even at 7, there really isn't a prospect. There's some really good prospects, don't get me wrong. But there isn't like a prospect that moves the needle for me at that point where I'm like, I have to keep the 7th pick in the draft. If I was being in that room, I would do everything I could. And I think a great example is the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, if people tend to forget this, but after Jalen Hurts' first year, the Eagles made a big draft day trade where they were able to acquire a future first-round pick in the next draft. And I said at the time that was a brilliant move because it did 2 things. Number one, it gave them ammo in a draft that was expected to have a lot of great quarterback talent. So the Eagles put themselves in a position where if Jalen Hurts didn't work, they had the ammo to go and get their guy. But instead, it worked out that Hurts was their guy, and they had extra draft capital to build around him. Now, for the Jets, I would do everything I can to try to get draft capital for next season. I would do everything I could in my power to trade out 7. The problem is, I'm not sure if you're going to get a great pick. Maybe you end up getting a 2nd-round pick for next year, and that's your best option. But I still would try to add assets to the war chest for the 2026 draft as opposed to 2025. Now, the big thing is who's going to want to come up to 7. Is there a team that's desperate for a quarterback in Jackson Dart? Is there a team that's desperate for Jalen Milroe? You would hope. The other thing you have to look at, too, is who's picking behind the Jets. I always say the best thing you want when you are in the draft is you want a quarterback-needy team picking right behind you because then it incentivizes a team to come up. Now, the problem is you look immediately, well, it's Carolina. Carolina's not likely taking a quarterback. However, number 9 is New Orleans. They're looking to move on from Carr. I think they would be in the quarterback market. That might be a team that Carolina doesn't want to give New Orleans their quarterback. Maybe New Orleans decides to jump Carolina in fear that a team's going to trade up and get that pick to get their quarterback. Now, at 7, could I see them coming all the way up to 7 to get a quarterback? It's possible. But the problem after that is there's not a lot of teams that you're looking at and you're going, damn, they need a quarterback. Chicago at 10 doesn't need a quarterback. San Francisco at 11. Dallas at 12. My ultimate thing would be if the Dallas Cowboys wanted to come up to get Ginty from Boise State. But I'm just looking at the board. Indianapolis is the first one I can kind of see maybe looking at a quarterback. But outside of that, I think the biggest thing you're looking for is, do the Saints get desperate and want to come up? And look, this is a intriguing draft for quarterback, but I'm going through my big board right now. I do not have great grades on these quarterbacks. And look, I like Jackson Dart a little bit better than Jalen Milroe, but these are guys I'm looking at. I'm going, if they're there in round 2, I would consider it. Or if they're sitting there at 32, 31, the Jets, of course, have the 2nd-round pick. You want to get that 5th-year option, then maybe I would consider it. But I just don't really love the quarterbacks in this draft, and I don't think it's wise for this team to put all this investment in a quarterback that we think is okay. Now, again, I know where Jet fans are coming from. I understand that they don't want to sit through another year of bad quarterback play. I understand that a rookie gives you hope because it's the unknown. It could be the next superstar for all we know. And I get that excitement. I get that appeal. But at the end of the day, the Jets need to rebuild this culture. And if they don't feel that that guy is in this draft, then don't overdo it. The worst thing you can do is get stuck with a quarterback that doesn't work. And look, Jet fans, we know all about that, being stuck with a quarterback that doesn't work. And again, guys, use that super chat feature to jump to the front of the line. Then use the super chat feature. Make sure you get to the front, and so I read your comments. And again, check out the poll that we have going on right now in the chat on YouTube so we can make sure to get all the viewpoints out there. And of course, guys, I want to hear from you. Well, we know where Ben Jesus stands. Thank goodness Rodgers is a cancer. June the GM, if that's true, we are moving on from A-Rod. Then we really need to figure things out at the quarterback position. The big thing with the quarterback position is, and I get where some of you guys are coming from, where Matthias is saying in the second or third round, this really isn't a great quarterback class. And even when you're looking in the second or third round, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of, I don't know. It's a lot of, like, Quinn Ewers, I think, is a good example. But I don't think Quinn Ewers would have the makeup to really work in New York. I don't think he has the mental makeup to be in with the New York Jets and in New York City. That's just my thought. The danger zone, jumping to the front of the line. Math isn't mathing. Hit the like for Sunday content. Thank you, Danger Zone, for the super chat. Again, using that feature to jump to the front of the line. And again, using that super chat. The math isn't mathing. Again, the other big thing too is the contract. Now, on the surface, it makes sense in the short term to play Rodgers this year because it's 23.5 against the cap if he plays, to the 49 million if he doesn't, which they can split up between the 2 years. I think I'd rather take the medicine now and get it over with than if he plays for the Jets next year. The cap goes up even worse. It's over $60 million charge against the cap for one season. If they divide it, then it's 42 in 2027. Do you really want to be paying Aaron Rodgers in 2027? And look, when Aaron Glenn was hired, I got the feeling then that basically when he was there, I just felt that a change was coming. I just felt that a change was coming and that was needed. And again, guys, I can see you guys are already pre-gaming for the Super Bowl later today. Good to hear from you. The thing is, it's a very difficult situation, no matter how you slice it. The big thing for me is you got the guy that wants to instill culture in Aaron Glenn. You got a guy that wants to build culture, guy that wants everything to be about the New York Jets. And unfortunately for Aaron Rodgers, it's Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. And I get it. Aaron Rodgers is one of the most influential quarterbacks we've ever seen. I mean, this is a guy who is a public figure, who has a Netflix documentary about him, has hosted Jeopardy, has had interests outside the game of football, is a polarizing figure for his political and different stances on viewpoints in life. And this is a guy who, on a weekly episode of one of the most popular sports shows in this country, makes headlines. I guarantee you that it's going to come out on McAfee this Tuesday that probably Rodgers is going to be the one that announces it. I think that the Jets and him have come to this sort of agreement where it's like they're not moving on, but they're not going to embarrass him. They're going to let him, because that's who he is, go on McAfee and basically say, look, I appreciate my time with the Jets. I just need a new chapter in my life. We've agreed that both of us need a change. It's not me. It's not them. It's we're not seeing eye to eye. I just could see that happen. Like if you had to ask me my prediction, I think Rodgers is going to go on McAfee on Tuesday and he's going to basically put it out there like, hey, I'm moving on. I'm still healthy. Or he's going to do something of the form, or he might even do this. He might say, look, I'm moving on from the Jets in terms of my football career. I don't know. I think that he is becoming a bit like Brett Favre, where he enjoys having the spotlight on him, the intrigue. And I think he's going to kind of go silent for a week or two right before free agency and then come out and say, you know what? I'm still interested in playing. I had a lot of self-reflection. I've looked inward. I've had my retreat. And I've decided that I still love this game, that I still love football, and I still feel that I can compete at a high level. Like, if you had to ask me, that's what I think is going to happen this week. That is how I envision it going. Again, guys, use that super chat feature jump to the front of the line. Wow, if we had a QB, we could be winning a lot of these games. People that want Rodgers gone, but wait until October when we suck, toxic as hell, they'll have regrets. Look, Rodgers, like people nationally, is polarizing within this Jet fandom. And I get it. I understand. There is the thought process, and on this channel, I make a conscious effort to look at both sides of an argument. Now, if you look for people that want to keep Rodgers, I get it. Statistically, that was one of the greatest seasons in Jets franchise history for a quarterback. He's the best quarterback the Jets have probably had since, I don't know, Ryan Fitzpatrick's one-year heater in 2015. There really isn't great options out there. And like I said at the start of this show, if you are just to look at it from just the talent standpoint, from just the standpoint of who gives the Jets the best chance to win next year, well, it's clear. It's Aaron Rodgers. But the problem is it's a balancing act. Whenever we look at a player's talent, and I think the draft is a great example of this. When we look at a player's talent, we also look at the baggage that comes with them. There's a lot of talented players coming out of the draft, but what will determine where they are drafted most often is how much an organization is willing to deal with their baggage. Now, when Aaron Rodgers was a clear top 5, top 8 quarterback in the National Football League and was winning and going to the playoffs every year, organizations are more likely to put up with all the off the field stuff, with all the McAfee stuff, with all this polarizing stuff that he does in the offseason. But when you're playing more like a top 15, 14 quarterback, more in the middle of the road, your team's struggling, your team wins 5 games in a year, many thought you were going to end a playoff drought, it's harder to deal with. And I think with Aaron Glenn, they brought in someone that doesn't want this nonsense in the building and is someone that I really think cares about the Jets. When Rodgers came here, not to say that he didn't care about how well the Jets did, but Rodgers was coming here because A, the Packers didn't want him anymore. And number 2, he looked at this as an opportunity to be a savior. He looked at this to be the opportunity to be the savior of a franchise. And he thought this would be great for his legacy. I mean, think about it. Aaron Rodgers is going to have a massive butt in his career. When we look back on it, and this was the case with Tom Brady at one point, was Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback ever. But he needed Bill Belichick to be his head coach. Goes to Tampa, wins a Super Bowl, eliminates that from his byline. You look at Aaron Rodgers, one of the best throwers of the football we have ever seen, one of the best talents we've ever seen. If you were to create a quarterback, he'd be one of the 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the entire history of the NFL that you would create. But he only won 1 Super Bowl, despite that talent, despite the immense talent that he had. If he had gone to the Jets, won a Super Bowl, brought a Super Bowl to a franchise that hadn't won in over 50 years, and win his 2nd Super Bowl, that would cement him. But the problem is he only has 1. And I think for Rodgers, he does care about his legacy, but I am a little curious about how much is it more about him and the stats than it is about winning Super Bowls. Because the other thing too is Aaron Glenn is a no-nonsense guy. And Aaron Rodgers, to be fair, was a bit aloof. And the last coaching staff was a bit more of two-player friendly. Oh, Aaron Rodgers wants to go to Egypt? Okay, he can go, despite missing an entire season and playing only 4 snaps. Like, how would that have played with Aaron Glenn, first-time head coach? Rodgers comes to him before minicamp and says, I need time to really think. I need time to, reflect. Like, I can't be there. I don't think that would have gone over too well. And I do think that there are questions about Rodgers' commitment to the Jets, and they're fair questions. They are legitimate questions that you have about him. Like, how much is he going to put in this offseason? Like, even the previous offseason, yes, it was great that he was fighting back from his Achilles the year of, but then you look at this crucial second year where the Jets are all in. And it came back to haunt him, which was the Egypt trip. Now, on the surface, I don't think it was the reason the Jets went 5-12, but it was a little hole in the whole scenario. It was the crack in the dam starting to form. And at the time, I'll be honest, I think most of us were like, not a big deal. But we were also, I think, at that point just hoping, because at the time, we hadn't really actually seen Rodgers play for the Jets. We weren't sure how this was going to look, how this was going to be. And then we get into last season, and it's frustrating. And there were moments where Rodgers looked like the savior that was promised. But more often than not, missing Mike Williams, missing Garrett Wilson, then bringing in Devontae, then only having eyes in the last 5 games to throw to Devontae into Allen Lazard. And I also think it's very important, too, where the Jets, I think this is sending a statement, where it was told that Garrett Wilson would request a trade if Rodgers was back. And I get where he's coming from. I think Garrett Wilson looks in and goes, is Aaron Rodgers here to help us win, or is he here to pad stat lines? Because especially when he was going for 500, you could tell there were many times he was forcing it to Devontae, trying to get to Devontae when Garrett was wide open. And the big thing that always stuck out to me last year was actually brought up by a former Jet. It was Mark Sanchez. And it was, I'm forgetting the game. I know it was later in the season. So I apologize if I don't have the game. You can let me know if you know what it is in the chat. But there was an RPO play where a run pass option play where Mark Sanchez broke it down. And when I looked back at the film, he was completely right. And it was this. Aaron took the snap, could have handed it to Brees. There was a wide open hole. Brees probably gets 7-8 yards. It's a first down play. It's a 2nd and 2, 2nd and manageable. It opens up the playbook. You can take shots on play action. You can run the football. A lot of different things. Instead, Rodgers keeps it, tries a short throw, and it's dropped, and it's 2nd and 10. But it wasn't that it was a frustrating play operation. It wasn't the fact that Aaron Rodgers, who's supposed to be this cerebral assassin of a quarterback, missed that. It was the fact that Sanchez brought up a really good point. Then he said, that was a very high percentage throw. And Rodgers is trying to help his completion percentage. And when I look back at it, I'm like, that's right. And think about it this way too. When Rodgers down the stretch was playing, how many times Garrett Wilson, who's the best offensive player on this team, was not the leader in targets? Now, again, I know a lot of you are going to say, well, he finished the season top 5 in targets. But if you look the last couple of games, he wasn't featured. And there were many games up until the 4th quarter where not only was Devontae not only targeted more, but was double or sometimes triple the targets. But there were many games when Allen Lazard, who's not going to be on this team next year, Aaron's buddy, the buddy that the Jets had to vastly overpay for to bring him here, was out targeting Garrett Wilson, which should never happen in a game. I remember there was one game too where I was looking at it and it was like, okay, Devontae has X amount of targets. Allen Lazard has this many targets. Tyler Conklin has this many targets. And then it's like Garrett Wilson had 1. Mind-blowing to me. But again, guys, use that super chat feature to guarantee that your comment is read. Again, Danger Zone, Dano Jets using it to get to the front of the line. But let's see what some of you are saying. I hope the Jets drafted QB, but not in the first round. Use Tyrod as a bridge. I think he still has a lot in the tank. Try to get draft picks for Rodgers and Adams. Look, Rodgers, they're going to cut. But Adams is intriguing. And I can get into some of this when the Devontae Adams video I'm potentially doing this week. Again, guys, if you haven't, go check out the community page. I've given you 3 options of different videos that I can do this week about the Jets offseason. Now, again, that can all change depending on when this news probably drops, which if I had to put money on it, is probably going to be Tuesday on McAfee. But I think Adams could get you something in return. Ideally, I'd love the Jets to try to get the 3rd round pick they got back. So try to get a 3rd round pick, maybe a 4th round pick. I also would look at it too, as like I said earlier, maybe you could get assets in the future. So maybe you trade Devontae, but not for a 2025 pick, but maybe you can get a 3rd rounder in 2026. Maybe you can get creative and package a 4th this year with Devontae to try to get a 2nd round pick next year. Because like I said, I think next year's draft is going to be a lot better, especially with the quarterback position. I would try to get assets in that draft as opposed to this one. Look, the Jets still have assets. They still have three picks on the first 3 rounds, round 1, round 2, round 3. They have multiple picks on day 3. It's not like they're coming into this with like 6 draft picks in a completely bare cupboard in terms of draft capital. They have some. So I don't think they necessarily need to go crazy and try to get draft picks this year, but I would definitely look at getting into next year as well. Glenn and Rodgers are both old school and might really like each other. I could see that potentially working, Scott. I don't think it's impossible for Rodgers to come back. I just get the feeling, because they have said that Glenn has talked to Rodgers, and look, they might really like each other, but I still think this is going to come down to Rodgers. And let's be honest, the Jets are more seemingly into a rebuild. I do think Glenn's going to try to win, obviously, from day one. But the problem is, you look at this situation, and it just feels like if you had to look from the Jets' perspective, the best thing long-term is getting rid of Rodgers this year. Because, yes, if they eat the medicine and take $49 million against the cap this year, it hurts. But let's say you keep Rodgers. Let's say he plays next year. Let's say it's okay. Jets don't make the playoffs, but they're an 8-19. Well, in a crucial offseason when you're trying to extend Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, all these guys, instead of having a boatload of cash, you have potentially over $40 million in dead cap space, possibly $60 million in dead cap space for the 2026 offseason. Not exactly ideal. Like, again, I almost would use this year as the year to take your medicine and just move forward. And I get it. They might really like each other, but I just get the feeling when Schefter's saying this, when all these guys are saying this, and I understand that Rodgers doesn't trust the insiders and isn't leaking all these sources and will say he hasn't given anyone any information. I think he's going to be the one that controls the narrative, and he's going to be the one like, I do think that it will be a situation where I look at this whole thing and I go, okay, I think that the best thing for both parties is to just get a fresh start. And as much as I respect Aaron Rodgers and as much as I think he wants to come back, I do think, though, he realizes this isn't going to work. And long term, like the best scenario is he makes the playoffs next year. Then it's like, okay, now what? So I think that this is a good time to turn the page. But Scott also thinking that Devontae, again, I don't hate that it's Devontae getting that much targets, but only getting 2 or 3 times the targets of Garrett Wilson that I highly disagree with. Again, guys, to make sure your comment is read and jump to the front of the line, use that super chat feature. And again, check out our poll in the YouTube channel. I want to hear what your thoughts on are keeping Aaron Rodgers, and check out the community page because, again, I have 3 different video options for you on the Rich Sports Talk community page. And again, they're going to be videos I could do this week. We're still going to have a lot of draft capital as well. But on the community page, if you're joining us in the live stream or if you're joining us afterward, you should make sure to interact with that. I have, number 1, dark horse quarterback targets for the Jets. Number 2, trade possibilities for Devontae Adams. And number 3, keep or release with the Jets' top 10 free agents. I go through the Jets' top 10 free agents in this class, and I let you know who I think should be here next year and who the Jets should target. Now, again, a lot of that also depends on the contracts. It also depends on the Aaron Rodgers. Because again, if they move on from Rodgers, which I think is likely going to happen, that's $49 million against the cap this year. It's going to be very, very difficult for a lot of these moves to happen. But it will be very intriguing to see how the Jets do this. I expect this already. 2 years in is enough for me. Let's move on. Thank you. I don't disagree. And I think that's the other side where Carlos is coming from. I think when you look at Jet fans, you look at the people who look at it rational, who there's the two sides. I'm sorry I mixed up the rationale, but there's two sides. I already talked about the one side about the ones that want Rodgers to come back. When you look at the side where they don't want Rodgers to come back, I think the problem with Rodgers is emotionally, it is exhausting because as Jet fans, you looked at how he interacted with the media. You looked at how, he kept, even when the bottom was falling out, was talking overly positive. I think it was tough nationally because basically every Tuesday when you were a Jet fan, you had to put on your calendar because it's like, all right, we know what the coaching staff said on Sunday or after a Monday game. We know what Rodgers said, but let's see how he really feels on McAfee because you just knew something different was coming and you knew that there was going to be a major developing story. And look, the Jets tried everything. They traded for Devontae. They tried with Hassan Reddick. Like they went all in this year and it blew up. And I think at this point, it doesn't make sense to triple down because they doubled down last year. It doesn't make sense to triple down going into this year. And I do think there's a lot of guys on this team like Jermaine. I do think there are still really good guys in Quincy. I think there's still guys that would love to have Aaron Rodgers back, but it just feels like this organization has made decisions which reflect that they're moving on. When you look at the whole picture, I always say this when you're covering sports and when you're covering major stories like this. I think that the biggest thing you look for when you are covering a team and you're covering an organization is the following. You can read everything. You can read quotes, you can read comments, but the biggest thing I always look for is actions. And I say this all the time on this show. Actions to me speak a lot louder than words. And look at what the Jets' actions have been this offseason. What have the Jets done? They've hired a first-time head coach, a defensive head coach who played for this organization, had success in this organization, and really has a deep passion to turn this organization around. You then look at who they hired as the GM. They hired a GM who is the right-hand man of the Denver Broncos, a team that's really good at evaluating analytics, but also the draft. But what was the big thing with the Broncos last year? It was maneuvering around a very difficult cap situation that they created around a quarterback. In a worse cap situation than the Jets would be in with Rodgers. I mean, we talk about how bad the Rodgers cap situation is. Broncos is 10 times worse. But the big thing with them was they were able to make shrewd decisions. They were able to get key pieces like John Franklin Myers. Sorry I bring up that post-traumatic stress, Jet fans. But they made shrewd moves. They brought in pieces that helped that team. And they were a playoff team last year. This, in spite of that major cap hit. And they moved off of Russell Wilson because they realized long-term, yeah, he might in the short term be the best option, but long-term, they needed to get out from under that albatross of a contract. And they needed for the health of the organization long-term to get out from underneath it. That's who they hired as their GM. That is who they targeted as a GM. Then you look at the offensive side. They could have gotten a veteran OC. They got a first-time OC. But they also brought in an OC from Detroit, who is an organization that, yes, they are winning with a veteran quarterback, but they have highly innovative concepts. They rely heavily on the run game. I think you're going to see a lot of heavier run designs from the Jets, which I'm all for next year. But you look at it, it's an innovative, highly motion-based system. Rodgers has said repeatedly that he does not want to change. He doesn't want to make major changes. He wants to run an offense the way he wants to run an offense. So instead of getting someone that ran that system or someone that he's worked with before, they've gone a completely different direction and brought in a highly inventive offensive play caller. And I think that tells you a lot about what the Jets are thinking. Now, could they look at it and say, this is a one-year Band-Aid? It makes sense for Rodgers for one more year? Sure. But I think that the Jets have basically made wholesale changes, and it's not just the coaching staff. I mean, you look, they are firing long-term executives that have been with this team. Like they're not just ripping this down to the studs. I mean, they're tearing down the freaking house and rebuilding the house from scratch almost. And it is clear to me that they are trying to change a culture. They are trying to get people that are bought in. And look, there's going to be painful decisions, Jet fans. There might be players that we've really grown attached to, that we really love, that could be moved on from because they maybe don't fit the culture. Maybe long-term, they don't make sense for this organization. But this is a team that is going to go through dramatic changes. And Rodgers has been a guy that has pushed back on change his entire career. I do see a scenario where they could play together for a year. Maybe Rodgers grooms someone. I do think that's all possible. But more than likely, when you look at everything the Jets have done this offseason to this point, how they haven't been talking to Devontae Adams, how they have basically handled this offseason, I think it is pretty clear that they are ready to move on from Aaron Rodgers. And don't forget, this is a regime that doesn't have loyalty to Rodgers. These aren't the guys that traded for him. This isn't Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. They put all their eggs in this basket. And look at where they are now. They don't have Robert Saleh is the defensive coordinator for the 49ers now. He's not a head coach. So when you look at everything the Jets have done, it just tells me they are moving on, that they are doing a complete renovation of this organization. And when you have a quarterback who is the most resistant to change and doesn't like things changing around him, basically telling everyone, this is the offense I want to run. I don't want to change it. You look at everything the Jets have done, it has been in direct contrast of that. And I do think that, yes, I understand that there won't be like a Bo Nix. And I know that that's the one piece of the Bronco plan that a lot of people are looking at. But long term, I do think that the Jets understand, and Dave Roll and Jay Glazer, Jets are moving on. Like Jay Glazer, I do think is one of the most reliable sources in the National Football League. So I get that. But overall, I think the big thing you have to look at is you make a list. I think we do this all the time, whether it's a new job, whether it's potentially moving on. And look, I get it. Like this is a rough decision, and this is also breaking from Glazer 3 minutes ago. Aaron Rodgers flew back to New Jersey last week to meet with the Jets about his future with the team, only to be told the team was moving on from him. If that means that he will be a June 1st designation, that allows him to sign with any team in the league on March 12th if he decides to continue playing. Given that Aaron made the effort to fly back to discuss his future, all signs to him point to continuing to play. It just won't be for the Jets. So that's from Jay Glazer. I think that that is very important in a big development. And look, I think it is a decision that was needed to be made. And as many conflicting reports out there are, but because I do see some reports saying, oh, he could be back, he wouldn't be back. I get the feeling that basically the Jets have made the decision and that right now they are moving on from Aaron Rodgers, but they're going to allow basically Rodgers to announce it on McAfee. I guarantee that's going to happen this week. I mean, I think the Steelers might make sense, Zig, for Rodgers. But look, I just feel like according to Glazer, and I think Glazer has good sources, you look at this scenario. Rodgers was probably, let's be honest, like let's take some truth serum. The Jets likely are not a playoff team without Aaron Rodgers next year. I think they can still compete for a playoff spot, but they are more of a playoff team with Aaron Rodgers than without him. But the thing is right now for the Jets, and as painful as this is, and as painful as the playoff drought is, if I am the Jets, and if I'm a fan of the Jets, which we are, I would rather, again, extend this playoff drought another season, but build a team that competes every single year than do what the Jets did in 2015. I mean, the Jets in 2015 sold out for a 1 year of success, and they didn't make the playoffs. But it was a season where they sold their soul, and it cost the team for years afterward. I mean, there's a reason why the Jets haven't had a winning season since then. And look, a lot of it's been poor decisions. A lot of it has been a lot of bad drafting, bad contracts. But for me, I do think that if you were to make a list of the pros and cons, yes, the pros of keeping Aaron likely means that this is a team that is more likely to compete for a playoff berth, likely to have a better offense and be a better, quote, team next year. But if you were to look at the cons, I feel that they outweigh the pros. And when you look at the Jets as an organization, yes, Aaron Rodgers gives them the best chance to win in 2025. And I get it. And I understand how desperate this fan base is for winning. I understand how desperate this team and this fan base is to change the perception of this organization. I get all of that. But when you look at this team, and I think Rex Ryan had a great quote today, which is you need to have an Aaron running this franchise. And it is clear that is Aaron Glenn and no longer Aaron Rodgers. When you look at the long term of this franchise, they need to change the culture at the core. They need to change the culture from top to bottom. And I don't think Aaron Rodgers fits that culture. As good and as talented of a player as he is, there is a lot of baggage that comes with him. And I think that the Jets in this organization is tired. I think that they are tired of dealing with this. And when you look at, let's be honest, this is a 41-year-old quarterback who, let's also be honest, we look at it and you look into it, and Rodgers looked like he was regressing last year. There would be signs that he was still the same quarterback. There would be signs of the old Aaron Rodgers in there, but it's clear that he is on the downslope. And the one thing with older quarterbacks, it's like older players in every sport. If I'm a team, I would rather get out a year early than a year too late. Because you could keep Aaron Rodgers, but what if he regresses next year and plays terribly? It's not going to be worth it to keep him here. Where when you look at this Jet organization, they need to change the culture. And financially, it makes more sense because when you look at it at the surface level, you look at it initially, you go, oh, it's only $23.5 million if he plays next year for the Jets. That's great. But then you look past that and you go, oh, then it's going to be even bigger cap charge when he's even older. If you split it this year, it's 14 and 35, where you could 14 and 35, or you can take the 49 million this year. Well, the next year, that's going to be even more. That's going to be, if you split it, it's going to be over 20 and 40 million. And if you take it all as a lump sum, it's going to be over 60 million. So right now, you're looking at it and saying, do we really want to trust a 41-year-old quarterback who's on the downside of his career to somehow magically find it again? Or do we take next year as a year where, yes, it isn't going to be pretty. Yes, the Jets are going to not have great quarterback play. But is this a team that with a better offensive line, with talented running backs, can run the football, play time of possession, improve their defense? I mean, it wasn't too long ago where this team was winning games with Zach Wilson as a quarterback. If they can just get an okay quarterback, I'm not even saying a great quarterback, and if they can fix some of the issues on the defense, this could easily be a team that's a playoff competitor. I'm not saying a playoff team, but someone that we are watching and competing week 16, week 17, week 18 to try to get into the postseason. As opposed to week 10, we are scrolling through Tankathon and trying to figure out where their draft position is. But there's going to be a lot more on Aaron Rodgers. And of course, these dominoes, because this is just the first and biggest one to fall, ladies and gentlemen. There's going to be a lot more this offseason because the big thing is if Aaron Rodgers is gone, it's a trickle-down effect. How do they address the quarterback position? What happens with Devontae Adams? Depending on how they space out the cap hits, how does that impact free agency? How does that impact the players that they bring back? There is a lot to dissect going forward. And we'll be here every step of the way. And we will break it all down and we will make sure to talk about and make sure that you are included in that conversation. So make sure to like, make sure to subscribe because, again, we are trying to grow this community, especially with the Jet fans, and get as many Jet fans here as possible. If you know any Jet fans that would love to come on, please let them know about our channel. Like, subscribe, and share this as much as possible. And also, guys, you are a major part of this channel. Don't forget that. I want you to go to the community page right now and check it out. I've given you 3 possible videos that I can make this week for you. Now, again, I'm going to be doing this throughout the offseason because I want to gauge what you want to hear about, because you are the audience and you are important. And I want you to check that out. There's a lot of engaging stuff in there, and I want you to make sure to let me know what you want to be talking about, because I can talk about anything, but it's what you want to talk about that really does matter. Again, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. We will be back with more Jets content throughout this offseason. What it will certainly be a wild one. Make sure you're there for the ride here on Rich Sports Talk. We will see you next time.